Most people assume that staying silent makes you look weak. They think that holding your tongue means you've lost the argument. They think stepping away means you had nothing worth saying. And because of this assumption, people feel compelled to defend themselves immediately. They rush to fire back. They scramble to make their case. But this instinct leads people straight into one of the most predictable psychological traps in human behavior. The instant you respond emotionally, you hand over control of the situation. Because whoever provoked you was never actually searching for the truth. They were hunting for a reaction, a raised voice, a sharp reply, a flustered explanation, anything that confirms they've gotten inside your head. What most people fail to recognize is that provocation is essentially a psychological fishing hook. The words thrown at you are simply the bait. The real goal is to pull you into an emotional response. And the moment you take it, everything shifts. You're no longer watching the situation from the outside. You're caught up in it. You're defending yourself, explaining your position, scrambling to respond to every move they make. And while you're doing all of that, the other person is sitting back and observing something very telling: how easily they can push your emotional buttons. This is precisely why the person who reacts first tends to come out on the losing end, because reacting transfers power. It signals to the other person that they have a direct line into your mind. But centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli noticed something quite different about how people operate. He recognized that power in social situations rarely comes from being louder, more aggressive, or more argumentative. It comes from controlling attention and emotion. And sometimes the most powerful move available to you isn't confrontation at all, it's calculated silence. When you choose not to react, when you stay composed, when you deny someone the response they were counting on, something remarkable starts to unfold. The person who attempted to provoke you begins losing their grip on their own emotions. Not because you overpowered them, not because you won a debate, but because you refused to play the game they set up. Silence does something deeply unsettling to the human mind. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty throws people off balance far more effectively than any argument ever could.
In this video, we're going to break down 7 powerful psychological mechanisms inspired by Machiavellian thinking that explain why strategically ignoring someone can completely flip the power dynamic in an interaction. You'll come to understand why silence frustrates manipulators, throws provocateurs off balance, and quietly returns authority back to you. Because sometimes the most formidable person in the room isn't the loudest one. It's the one who can't be emotionally baited into the conflict. Before we begin, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. Silence is power. Let's get into it. Number 1, the psychological mirror break. Human beings are constantly looking for evidence that they occupy space in other people's minds. Every comment, every insult, every subtle provocation comes loaded with an unspoken expectation, a reaction. That reaction functions like a mirror. When someone provokes you and you respond with anger, they instantly see proof that their words landed. When you defend yourself, they receive confirmation that their opinion carries weight. When you argue back, they know they've successfully entered your mental space. Put simply, your response reflects their influence back to them. This is why provocateurs often watch your face more closely than they listen to what you're actually saying. They aren't just talking, they're measuring impact. But the moment you choose not to react, something unexpected happens to the structure of the interaction. The mirror shatters. Suddenly, the person who was expecting to see their influence reflected sees absolutely nothing. No anger, no defense, no visible sign of emotional disturbance. Their words fall away into silence. Initially, that silence throws them off. They were expecting friction, expecting pushback. Instead, they find only absence. And the human mind is profoundly uncomfortable with absence in a place where it anticipated impact. The brain begins frantically searching for explanations. Was that intentional? Did they not hear me? Are they tougher than I assumed? Did I misjudge this person? Confidence starts giving way to uncertainty. Just moments before, they believed they had a clear read on the dynamic between you. They were convinced they had emotional access to you. But without the mirror of your reaction, their sense of control begins to fall apart. This is where the psychological fracture starts to form. People rely heavily on feedback to gauge their influence over others. A leader looks for signs of attention. A critic looks for signs of defensiveness. A provocateur looks for signs of irritation. When none of those signals show up, the brain loses its entire measurement system. Imagine speaking into a room where none of your words produce an echo. At first it feels odd. After a moment it becomes genuinely unsettling. That is precisely what psychological silence does to someone trying to get under your skin. The absence of a reaction forces them to face a possibility they hadn't prepared for, that they might not register at all in your mental world. And that realization destabilizes people far more than any direct confrontation ever could. Confrontation at least acknowledges that the other person exists. Silence quietly removes them from the equation entirely. This is why seasoned strategists rarely scramble to respond to every attack or insult. They understand that attention is its own form of currency. Every reaction you give is an investment of energy into the interaction. Every defense is confirmation that the other person successfully captured your focus. But silence withdraws that investment entirely. The provocateur is left pushing against an empty psychological space. And that empty space has a remarkably powerful effect on human perception. It amplifies doubt. The person starts replaying the moment over and over in their mind, hunting for clues about what went wrong. They may try again with sharper words. They may raise their voice, they may push harder. But none of those attempts can restore the mirror they lost. Instead, what begins to surface is their own need for validation. This contrast produces an invisible shift in how anyone watching perceives the situation. One person looks grounded and unaffected. The other looks increasingly desperate to be acknowledged. And that difference, without a single argument being exchanged, quietly realigns the power dynamic. Machiavelli once said, "He who controls himself controls the field of power." Real influence often comes not from what you say, but from what you refuse to respond to. When someone cannot find their reflection in your reaction, they are forced to confront something far more uncomfortable than resistance. They confront irrelevance, and very few people can face that feeling without losing their composure. Now I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I control my reactions. Number 2, status ambiguity. Every interaction between two people contains a silent calculation that most people never consciously register. Beneath the words, beneath the tone, beneath all the visible behavior, the human brain is constantly working through one core question. Who holds the higher psychological ground here? This evaluation runs automatically in the background. It happens in business meetings, casual conversations, arguments, and even brief social exchanges. People are continuously reading confidence, emotional steadiness, and behavioral responses to determine where everyone stands in the invisible hierarchy of the moment. The interesting thing is that most people give away their position without realizing it. When someone insults them and they immediately rush to defend themselves, they unintentionally signal that the other person's opinion carries real weight. When they react with visible anger, they reveal emotional investment. When they keep explaining themselves over and over, they communicate that the accusation has burrowed deep enough into their mind to demand correction. These reactions look normal on the surface, but psychologically they hand valuable information to the other person. They reveal that the provocation worked, that it created genuine engagement. And engagement confirms that the interaction matters to you. Once it matters to you, the other person knows they have leverage over your emotional attention. But something entirely different unfolds when you respond with calm indifference or deliberate silence. Rather than confirming the hierarchy, you introduce uncertainty into it. The other person can't easily figure out why you went quiet. Did you stay silent because you felt cornered, or because the whole thing wasn't worth your attention? The mind immediately tries to work through that question. But without clear signals from you, it can't settle on an easy answer. This produces what psychologists often call status ambiguity. The social hierarchy of the interaction becomes blurry, and human beings are deeply uncomfortable with blurry hierarchies because the brain craves stability in social structure.
When people can't determine their standing relative to yours, they start trying to restore clarity. This is why individuals so often escalate when they're ignored. They repeat their criticism, They sharpen their language. They try humor, sarcasm, or social pressure. Each attempt is an unconscious push to force a response that will finally reveal where you stand. But every failed attempt only deepens the ambiguity. The person expected a quick emotional signal confirming their dominance. Instead, they find composure and distance. And that composure starts quietly reshaping the feel of the entire interaction. Your silence opens up the possibility that you aren't avoiding engagement out of weakness. You're simply choosing not to bother. That possibility begins shaping how everyone watching interprets the dynamic. Observers rarely analyze things in depth. They read visible cues. When they see someone pushing hard for a reaction, while the other person stays calm and unmoved, they instinctively start wondering who actually holds the stronger position. The person visibly hungry for acknowledgement starts losing credibility, while the silent individual appears composed and self-possessed. No direct confrontation required, no verbal sparring. It all happens quietly through the management of expectation. Machiavelli once said, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see but few can truly perceive." Perception often carries more weight than explanation. When you remain composed while others strain to provoke you, people read that composure as evidence of internal authority. And authority rarely needs to announce itself. It reveals itself through restraint. Status ambiguity works because the human mind instinctively tries to sort people into clear levels of influence. When someone can't locate your level, they start adjusting their own behavior to resolve the puzzle. But the harder they push, the more their own standing begins to slip. In the end, the person who stayed silent never had to argue for respect. The silence alone forced others to reassess the hierarchy. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My silence commands respect. Number 3. The invisible wall. Most people believe strength shows up through confrontation. They assume authority means talking louder, debating harder, and hammering their point home until the other person gives in. In many moments, this feels like the natural response because it seems active and decisive. But confrontation also creates something entirely predictable, a visible battlefield. The moment you start arguing, both sides immediately understand the structure of the exchange. There are attacks and defenses, accusations and counter-arguments, pressure and response. Every move invites the next. The conflict turns into a game with rules both players recognize, and once you step into that structure, you're no longer directing the environment. You're just another participant inside it. But deliberate silence introduces something fundamentally different. Rather than visible resistance, the other person runs into something they can't quite make sense of. Picture someone pressing against a door, fully expecting it to swing open only to find it completely solid. They push harder. Nothing happens. They try again with more force. The door still doesn't budge. Frustration gradually overtakes confidence because the expected response never comes. Psychologically, ignoring provocation works the same way. Instead of offering the other person something to push against, you present an invisible barrier. They come at you with criticism, no emotional movement. They try sarcasm and still nothing. They attempt embarrassment or public pressure, and the calm, quiet stillness remains exactly as it was. At first, the absence of engagement leaves the provocateur genuinely confused. They were counting on resistance, they wanted an exchange. Instead, they're up against something they have no way to interact with. The human brain depends on social feedback to make sense of situations. When that feedback disappears, it struggles to process what's happening. This is why the invisible wall becomes increasingly maddening the longer it holds. The provocateur starts escalating in an attempt to break through. Their voice may rise, their words may sharpen, the emotional intensity may climb. But every escalation reveals something telling. They are now working harder than you are. This reversal shifts the emotional weight of the situation. The one pushing for engagement starts looking unstable, while the silent person appears steady and grounded. What makes the invisible wall so effective is that it removes the very reward provocateurs are after. Many people provoke others because the reaction itself is the payoff. It confirms that their words landed. But when their words collide with silence, that reward simply doesn't exist. Instead of the satisfaction they were after, they encounter irritation and confusion. Over time, the absence of a response becomes more wearing than any argument could have been, and that discomfort starts reshaping their behavior in ways they didn't anticipate. Some people eventually walk away entirely because the invisible wall makes the whole effort feel futile. Others grow visibly frustrated because they can't force the reaction they came for. Either way, The dynamic tilts in your favor without a word being exchanged. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't justify yourself. The absence of reaction alone built the barrier that held your psychological ground. Machiavelli once said, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." In many confrontations, the reactive person moves first while the strategist observes quietly. Silence can look passive to those who equate power with aggression, but controlled silence is not passivity. It's deliberate restraint. It's the ability to recognize when engaging would only strengthen the other person's position. The invisible wall carries an important lesson about social influence. Not every provocation deserves a response. Some conflicts only gain power the moment you step inside them. By refusing to engage, you cut off the oxygen the conflict needs to survive. The other person may keep pushing, searching for a crack in your composure, but if the wall holds firm, their effort eventually exposes itself as nothing more than unnecessary noise. And when people realize they are pushing against something that simply will not move, they tend to exhaust their own emotional energy long before they put a dent in yours. Drop this affirmation in the comments: calm is my shield.